Yeah, we're off, guys.
Did you know that most garage doors don't lock when they shut? So you could protect your garage with one of these, or you could just get a B&D garage door, because when a B&D door is shut, it can be locked shut. Is your garage as safe as can B&D?
Alrighty, welcome everybody to Tough Talks. I am joined again tonight by the man, the myth, the legend, and renowned author, Mr. Gary Wayne. How are you doing tonight, Gary?
Hey,
Doing
Phil,
very
good to
well,
see you,
and
mate.
thank you for inviting me back, and very much looking forward to the conversation tonight. So, yeah,
As
just
am I.
happy to be here and staying busy as usual. I'll throw a little bit of shameless self promotion in. So,
Please,
working on just been working so hard on getting the next book out. So I approved the cover design today, and it'll have some similarities to the first one. So it shows as a linkage. And for people who aren't aware of what the book's going to be called, it's going to be called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End Time Prophecy. So this book is specifically targeted at Christians, and it gives you all the information in the Bible about giants, hybrid giants, the angelic order, the rebellious angelic order. Gives you the terms coming out of that prehistory, and then I start to lay down some end time chronology in defining those terms in end time prophecy. And so it's hopefully going to be out by August or September. I've just completed editing the editor in section 5, and then I'll have one more complete edit to do, which is more of a scan, just looking for anything sort of obvious. So it's not that I'm trying to override what the editor does, but it's, they're there to do a certain part, and then I need to make sure, because my name goes on it, that
Well, yeah.
And I'm not a good editor, so I need the structure, but I need to be able to make sure that nothing sort of has been added or changed, which is the first part of editing the editor, but then making sure there's consistency and things like that, because I go so deep that it's a Christian editor, but it's like being in the deep end for them. So
Sure. Well, I can imagine. I'm sure that there's a number of publishing houses out there that when they get a book in, regardless of where it's coming from, if it's on a topic that they're not well versed in, they probably have a bit of trepidation. Like, do we put our name on this? Like, is this all on the level? Is this craziness?
Well, there's a lot of censorship within Christian publishing too. So if you don't, believe it or not, you would think that open debate within the church would be something that would be encouraged, but it's not. They're carrying the orthodoxy of whatever sort of branch of Christianity they come from. So if you have a different sort of eschatological position than churches, and many of them don't have a position, then they don't want to touch you. But let's say you have a different timing on some of the events, they don't want to touch you. And if anything to do with Genesis 6, they don't want to touch you. So anything on prehistory, they don't want to touch you. So you get down to a very few, let's say open mind Christian publishers that encourage the debate, encourage people to dig deeper into the Bible and not just receive your daily sort of message, but learn the Bible for yourself so you can put all the armor of God on. And that's what I try and do in this book.
Awesome. Well, as I'm given to do, let me show you all where you can find Gary's book. This is the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. You can find it on Amazon. Presently, right now, it's $9.99 on Kindle. It is $28.79 in paperback. Now, has this gone up in price yet, or is it set to?
Let's have a look at that. Was set to go up in price. The retail is going to be $34.60 or $34.80 US. I don't know whether the publisher has passed that on yet. publishing costs apparently have gone up 30% in the last couple of years. And my book is, I think 7 or 8 years old, so I have not had to put through an increase since the publishing of it. But yeah, it's going to be going up, and my new book will be similarly priced. And hopefully we get as good reviews as I got off of Amazon. I think there's almost 1,500 reviews on there, 1476, I think it says there. And it's got like a 4.75 rating, which is pretty good for a controversial book.
I should say so. So you heard it there, folks. It is set to increase in its price. So grab it right now while it is still at that $28.79 price. Also, you can find Gary over on his website here. This is going to be the Genesis6Conspiracy.com, where Gary has a very generous excerpt of his first book here, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and it is a weighty, weighty tome. You can run down the rabbit hole on this for days, weeks, months even. Yep. And as Gary was just saying, what is required when looking at a book like this or into this specific topic, Nephilim, secret societies, the apocalypse, you have to have a very well-rounded understanding of the Word of God. So the Berean Challenge is always laid at your feet. Born of Acts 17:11 says, don't listen to anything that Gary and I say as gospel truth until you have done your own digging on there to see if what you've heard is in fact so. That being said, we are jumping into tonight's topic. My name is Eric Roland. I run this podcast here. This is the Tough Love Podcast. You can find both Gary and myself on the Twitters. I'm at handle Eric Roland. We have Gary Wayne 63. You can also find me on Rumble. I would encourage you very much to hop on over to Rumble as well. Subscribe to my channel there, just in case I ever get booted off of YouTube. I can still maintain the fight there. And also, if you like the work that I do, please consider donating to my locals page. I've dubbed this stream a PG-13 stream because we're going to be getting into some dark topics the world over that some people may have a bit of a reservation about, letting their children hear. So parents, you have been warned. And you'll notice Gary doesn't have his video up right now. In the summer, Samuel kind of drops out for him where he is in sort of a remote location. But we have this beautiful headshot-esque photo here that we get to enjoy throughout the course of this talk tonight.
Yes, I'm at a very scenic lake in northern Saskatchewan, and the swimming is terrific, the fishing is terrific, and so I spend about 3 months up here. But one of the downsides is that you don't get the internet speed and capacity that you're required to do video uploads. So audio is all I do over the summer, and then I'll be booking heavily for video, and already am for after September the 15th. So
wonderful. Well, we are very grateful that you have joined us tonight. So topic at hand, folks, as the video title would imply, we're getting into a lot of the meat that Gary covers inside the Genesis 6 conspiracy. We're talking about the secret societies and the role that they play in subverting the truth throughout the world, subverting the gospel, and eventually having a role in the end times narrative as a whole. Gary, he has written a ton on this. I'm going to be referencing a couple of books tonight. One of them written by Anthony C. Sutton, which is America's Secret Establishment. This is all about the Order of Skull and Bones. And I'll also be referencing another one called Fleshing Out Skull and Bones as well.
Lynn, good to see ya.
Those are two books you can find a lot of information on. And there is a
Lynn, how's your health?
ton also inside Genesis 6 Conspiracy. But Gary, I'm just going to kick a question over to you, and we will let this just go organically. So when people talk about secret societies inside the world, when they talk about shadow governments or shadow organizations, typically one that you always hear people talk about is the Freemasons. You always hear them talk about the Illuminati. But then we have a few other orders that are sort of not as well known or understood, like the Rosicrucians, the Jesuits. Can you give my listeners sort of an understanding of that hierarchical structure?
Yeah, it's really important to try and get a good understanding on how they build their hierarchical societies. And there's a lot of models out there that people sort of present. Pyramid would be kind of one of the classic ones. But unfortunately, you can only build so much into a pyramid, and all of a sudden, it just doesn't sit. I mean, you might look at a pyramid model within a specific secret society, So whether Skull and Bones or
Wow.
Jesuits or the Committee of 300 or whichever one within that specific organization. But I suspect that doesn't really hold up. Maybe at the lower levels, it might hold up as well. So when I looked at trying to figure out secret societies, I knew nothing about them. But I knew from researching in prehistory that, and as I dug back to provide context for people within the different cultures, that you have a mystery religion, that it was an essential part of those beast empires and Nephilim empires, both before and after the flood. But it was a religion that was a knowledge cult. And within that understanding is you would have, and as I talk about in the book, and I'm just going to just go drift backwards to get to the organizational structure,
Sure.
But the history is kind of important to understand how old it is, so you can appreciate why the size of the organization is almost unimaginable. And so the mystery religion, the Sun Cult, was created before the flood by Enoch, son of Cain, where he takes the 7 sacred sciences that we know as the 7 liberal sciences today, 7 liberal arts, and he puts that into a mystery religion, a Sun Cult, because it's too important to be passed on to the mundane. So in this case, the Sethites, even though there was knowledge passed down from Adam to Seth in their belief system, not the same kind of knowledge that apparently was provided to Cain, who passed it on to Enoch. And if you're not aware, there's 2 Enochs in the book of Genesis.
Yep.
You need to be aware of that, because that's also part of the misinformation and the conflation that goes on things. So we're talking about what I call the evil Enoch as son of Cain, as opposed to the good or the ecclesiastical Enoch, son of Jared. Both wrote scripture. Both were very important in prehistory and before the flood, and have ripples that have continued on. But we need to understand there's 2, and the secret societies conflate the 2 and create a cover for themselves from, particularly in the West, from the Roman Church, sort of out of necessity in the last couple thousand years. But they were doing that even before. So it's because there's aspects of both that they will like to draft. And it's common for secret societies, and people may not be aware of this, but it starts to make sense when you consider how they honor Solomon and other patriarchs. They draft as many patriarchs into the Bible as possible to give them, or into the secret societies as possible, whether in the Bible, to sort of give them a little bit more credibility. So these sciences were the basis for the Sun Cult, the Gnostic Gnosis religion, and for the development of those knowledges and then the disciplines, they set up the mystery schools, mystery religion, religious schools, right, of the knowledge cult.
Len, is the Canadian health system looking after you? Because I know they're sort of like Australia's health system, social health.
And they would develop that knowledge, which was developed to a very large level, even to a level we're not quite up to yet, particularly as it later emerged with the angelic technology, which is we're starting to see now, I think. So within these mystery schools were the start of the secret societies, and they would have these bloodline organizations within, so different branches and different houses within those so-called ancient universities. We might recognize that today with Alpha and Beta and all these different sort of initiatory orders, but more importantly with more of the more signature bloodline organizations like the Skull and Bones. So that has been brought down, and most people don't realize that secret societies take their creation back to before the flood, at the time of the creation and just before the creation of the giants. And it's part of this whole organizational structure that was before the flood and then reestablished again after the flood with Nimrod at Babel. And he's accredited as being the first Grand Master of Masonry after the flood, who writes the first constitution for Masonry after the flood, takes that knowledge that's passed on to him from Hermes to build Babel Tower, and perhaps there's a little bit more to the legends of him trying to build it to go into heaven, that there was a technology to go into heaven with that knowledge, as in the Akkadian understanding of Babel isn't confusion of language. It's El as in a god. And it would be ILU, so Babalu would be more their English transliteration, and a portal or a gateway. So there's a technology associated with pyramids, ziggurats, and all. They're in kind of the same family of kinds of organizations, or towers would be the other reference that will come out of prehistory. So understanding that this is an organization that goes back to the original patriarchs in the Bible, crosses the flood with the original patriarchs after the flood, and has been with us ever since, starts to give you an understanding that this would be a very developed secret society network that is sponsored by the royal bloodlines, because it was societies of the elite, of the kings. And so that's part of that whole structure that we need to understand right out of the gate, that at the apex of the secret societies are the royal bloodlines. And they have their own sets of organizations. And so we might understand that today in the West, and understand there'd be similar organizations around the world. These are just the Western ones. You would have the 13 families, not typically the 13 families that people might use in North America, because we don't understand the whole hierarchy. People might look at DuPont, or they might look at JP Morgan or Rockefeller,
Bilderbergers.
Names like, Bilderbergers would be more closer to the money, because that's European.
Okay.
These are,
I didn't think about that.
right? These are American families that are sort of pasted into 13 families. Who knows? There might be 13 families that are important in North America, but they're called by the royals the pseudo blue bloods. In other words, they need to intermarry throughout the generations to become more recognized. And that's what they're in the process of doing. So America is kind of the attack dog, and was created as such by the royals to bring about the New World Order, the universe, and the universal religion. So when we have that sort of under our belt, let's build the platform up now. And then people are going to say, well, this is really kind of strange what you're talking about, but it has a simplicity that makes a whole lot of sense with their history. And we get some biblical definitions in there that we can understand that sort of go with it.
Sure.
So they have two kinds of trees in their organizational structures. One is a genealogical tree that we see as the family tree.
Yeah.
That's typically depicted
Len, you'd probably be dead, let's be honest.
As an elm tree, which is one of the most sacred trees in Gnosticism, just as you had the splitting of the elms as one of the rituals when the Templars split away from the Priory of Sion in 1188 after losing Jerusalem. It roots back into the Society of Ormus in Egypt, and related with that through that word and terminology. And the French word for an elm tree is orme. And so the Templars, when they conducted their business out of Paris, did it under a great elm tree. And so it's a sacred tree. So sacred trees within the royal families, the bloodlines, and royal is spelled Royal.
Phil, Diane's going to be late. She went out tonight and it's a long drive home. I let her know I won't be going on time. And she said, good, because I'm miles away from home. So she'll show up soon.
But that's just a transliteration of the AL, of EL, which is a god or an angel coming out of Hebrew. ROY is Old French roi, ROI for king, and roots back to Latin for regis and regal and words like that, and goes back to Indo-Aryan, the original language of the giants, into rule and ruler and things like that. So we have an etymological. So it's translated as royal, as kings of God. And if you heard the term Rex Deus, that means the same thing. And it's part of the Black nobility, which is all part of the whole organizational structure that we're going to be talking about. So again, understanding some of the language that they use helps us sort of understand. So The two other trees that you might see for sacred rituals and genealogical trees would be oak trees and ash trees, and they're almost used interchangeably, and even the translators get them wrong, and as they take that out of Hebrew and Greek and translate it in, but they're considered kind of like the same tree. So like the Tuatha De Danann, the Dat Tanu, their holy tree was an oak tree. Well, but in their belief system, it's the same as an elm tree because it's this great sort of shade tree. But it's that oak and ash and elm that's used interchangeably, which grew in significant numbers on Mount Hermon, from whom the Royals get their divine right to rule from as being the spurious offspring. So you have Amorites, which are a hybrid branch, as we've probably talked about in past shows, described in the book of Amos as being, as tall as the cedars and as strong as the oaks, right? Well, that's part.
Yeah, Phil, she's a big part of the stream, isn't she, Diane?
Of the definitions and the allegory that they use out of the Bible that has been recorded. Now, it's probably the Bible recording their allegory that they used in polytheism, but it's there and connected to Mount Hermon, so we have a good understanding. The next tree is the cedar tree of Mount Hermon, which was a giant tree. It would grow to 40 to 50 feet wide and 100 feet high. It was the giant tree of the cedar forest that King Habada reigned over and was appointed the terror for humans. And so he was to wreak terror upon humankind because that's what the terrible ones did. And the cedar forest was on Mount Hermon, of course. So again, you see prehistory in the Bible's recordings. We need to understand these things so we can better understand what our adversaries believe. And a lot of people say to me, do you believe what they believe? And I say, no, what I believe is that they believe it. And what they do with that belief system is what is important.
Sure.
And that's why we need to kind of understand that. So the cedar tree, it was used for all the ancient buildings around the ancient world, palaces, temples. So the Dionysian builders, post-Diluvian technology that was passed on through Hermes to Nimrod at Babel was passed on to the Pythagorean mystery schools that developed this building knowledge in Greece and handled all of the great palaces and temples. And so this evergreen tree is the tree that we need to focus on because it grows tall and straight, and its branches come down sort of at an angle. And it's an evergreen tree which represents immortality of the gods and immortality of the original Nephilim. And the genealogical tree is that shade tree. So it has all these different branches of different family bloodlines that they follow through their genealogies, which is why they invented that. And it is a tree that sheds its leaves, right? And so it doesn't represent immortality. It represents the change from the original structure to the new genealogical tree, because now you have the reincarnation allegory that they look at in that. So when the leaves fall off and then it renews in the spring, that's the reincarnation. And the disembodied spirits of the giants, they don't sleep. They wander. And so they created within their religion this reincarnation so that they could develop into godhood somehow, some way, but all they can do is possess bodies or create new bodies through technology as an oikantarian to dwell in. So it's this ancient organization, but both of those trees have their roots that go into the earth and into the sky. And it's joining heaven and earth. But in their belief system, Hades, Sheol, the other world, and when all the different names, Argatha around the world for the underworld, or Sheol is their heaven, where their gods reign from. Because when their gods rebelled, they weren't allowed in heaven. So that's where they reign from. And that's where they want to get to when they die, right? That's part of those rituals, is they want to get there, whether it's on a ship, on a parade, all sorts of different rituals around the world in terms of how they would try and get those people there. Because they don't want them, they want to go to the abyss. And they don't want to be wandering the earth in being lonely and like being in dry places, and the only way they can interact in the world if you're forced to wander the earth is to possess a body, which is always not a symbiotic relationship for either. So they have to suppress the host. So the roots go into Hades, where their power comes from and their bloodlines come from the genealogical tree. And the cedar tree is the power and the authority to rule as the spurious offspring come from the roots. And so places like, Nippur and Mount Hermon are places that join heaven and earth. It's a common understanding. It's the world tree allegory as well. You have mountains and the world tree sort of representing the same thing. And I cover that off in a fair bit of detail in the first book. So they call this a thelemic tree.
Now, what does thelemic mean?
Yes, that's what I wondered when I heard it. And when I first heard it, I thought, oh, this is
the Ptolemy bloodline, like Cleopatra. She was from the Ptolemy bloodline.
just misinformation because I don't know what it means. And so then I read, a book by Rabelais on Gargantua and giants, and it's talking about the Thelemic Society, which is basically their dystopia on Earth and their polytheist religion ruling, and the gods walking with them, and all, and giants. So it's basically this sort of a cult, mystical tour book of things, but again, they tend to base things on what's in the Bible. And if people don't understand that Freemasonry looks at the Bible that was written in the King James Version as very important to them, it's given to their initiates when they're joined. It's a specific Masonic Bible, but it's the King James Version Bible, and they have specific excerpts and passages they are assigned to learn that they use. So they use parts of the Bible that they want. And they had the King James Version Bible used to help them visibly swear their oaths and make that commonplace, whereas it ought not to be something that should be done in Christian nations, and we're told not to do that. But of course, we're living in an oath-based society that began with the oath of the Nephilim, the fallen angels on Mount Hermon, the Harum Anathema, to carry it out to the end to create the giants and destroy humankind. And this is the oath-based system that's in place, and the oath-based system that the kings and the royals swear to every time they're coronated. So when you were watching King Charles III, he's going through an ancient oath ritual, inheriting the divine right to rule from the Baalim gods as being the gods of after the flood.
Wasn't there even a stone he puts his feet on too during the actual coronation? Now that stone where it's cut from like another rock, right?
Mm-hmm. So there's two stones that's important to them. One is the Bethel stone, and one is the Akhenaten stone. Stone of Destiny would be another name, and so they're both important for different reasons. And again, I cover those off in the Genesis 6 conspiracy book in terms of the history of that. But whether or not it is the Bethel stone that comes over with, I think it's the granddaughter of Jeremiah, or it's Akhenaten stone that comes over with Skoda, daughter of Akhenaten, through the Tuatha De Danann migrations and amalgamations, and then over to Scotland. So one is in England today and one is in Scotland today. Long story short, and it's important in their belief system, but not really important for us. At least it shouldn't be. It's just vital for them. So when we have this oath-based system, this is based on prehistory, is what we've talked about, and goes back to Mount Hermon. And so they have an oral history called the Polychronicon, the ancient Masonic order. So two terms to remember as we get into the bottom level of Freemasonry, and where I'm going with the Thelemic tree is that Masonry is the royals of old. Freemasonry is a modern version and the lowest level of the secret societies on the Thelemic tree. Now, where the word Thelemic comes from is the Greek word thelem, and it's used in the New Testament several times for God's will, the will of God. For them, it's the will of the gods that they follow, the power of the gods. What will be, as they say on the occult saying, so is in heaven, so on earth, so is in
Yes.
Hades, so on earth, right?
As
That's
above,
their
so below.
kind of their motto. Again, it's similar to what Jesus said in the prayer, but it's a different heaven, right? And it's a different power. But again, they counterfeit everything, because everything is a counterfeit in the polytheist religions, and they're trying to emulate God. And they want a world on their own. So that's where the word thelemic tree comes from. So imagine the organizational structure is the trunk, a thelemic trunk from a giant cedar tree. And the bottom organization is Freemasonry. And Freemasonry is the first level to enter into the secret societies. As Alice Bailey said, it's a place where you want to bring in new initiates, and initiates from distant bloodlines, because you have to be invited. If you're not part of the bloodlines or genealogy in some sort of way, which they keep, and they're always creating database systems, whether it's genealogical database systems, whether or not it is a DNA or blood, they're always looking for more distant ones that they want to sort of bring back in, and through generations promise them, and money, because they have to pay money to be part of this. And that's what a lot of people don't know. If you're at the lower levels, they suck all your money out of you to try and move up the ladder and have your generations become more ennobled by intermarrying with more pure bloodlines down the road. So it's if you want to use a pyramid model, they have that as a true pyramid model, as a scam within the cult. It's right. So you want to know where that actually comes from. That's a secret society term, from my understanding of it anyways, what I was told. And I thought, oh, that makes perfect sense.
Sure.
So that's why the pyramid model seems to be more of a scam for trying to set up these organizational structures. So misinformation, I guess, would be the better word for it. So in the old system, you had 3 degrees for first level of adept, the old York system in Freemasonry. The more modern version that comes about in about the 1850s, and Pike is a big sort of proponent of this new order. It is the Scottish Rite, which has 33 degrees, which is the more commonly used one throughout North America. But it's equivalent to the 3rd degree, and all they've done is use their sacred numerology, number mysticism, and they've taken 3 and put 11, another prime number, steps of each degree. So if you're talking to somebody who says that they are like the 80th degree or something, understand that they're working on the Scottish Rite as opposed to the old York Rite. So, and I've been told there's as many as 100 degrees on the Scottish Rite system. So whether or not that's the actual number, probably not. It's probably a prime number. That's the actual number. But, if you take, 11 and multiply that through for each degree, or divide 11 into 100, you're going to get about 9 degrees. I've been told on the old system, there are somewhere between 7 and 13 degrees. And I've been told by different, I've got no substantiation for 13, just sort of a theory that people put out. But what we know, there's many degrees. So becoming an adept of Freemasonry, you're a low-level bloodline, and you're at the bottom of the rung of the adepts. Now,
TK Maxx, big brands, small prices. Apps at TK-lutely.
Watch every Serie A game live and exclusive.
Will he shoot? He's going to go out.
Now, in the Masonic model, the Freemasonic model that was set up both in North America, England, and continental Masonry in Europe, they would have multiple branches all around the countries, and they would be sort of grouped into sort of regions with a central sort of like a head office, right? So you have to be 5th degree of the old system to be like a regional manager, to put it in layman's terms, of multiple groups.
Okay, so like, I guess as the degrees sort of build up, because you mentioned there would have been 3 broken down to 11. So pretty much once you kind of cross that midway point, then you're now getting into upper echelons of it.
Yeah, so let's say your 5th degree, York Rite times 11 would be 55 degrees, right? Using the Scottish Rite model, if people are following me here. So, but that's just the North American model for the most part. It's some of it's used in Canada, but the old York Rite is, from my understanding, is still the traditional legacy one that comes out of history. And but they both end up doing the same thing. They're just built a little bit differently, but the degrees are sort of the same. And so from the adept level of Freemasonry, let's say the 4th degree and the 5th degree, that's where the Illuminati rank.
Okay.
And that sort of, they kind of merged in, as most people look at them, in about the 1700s into Freemasonry at that adept level. They were around for longer than that so-called creation in the 1700s, or they probably go back to about the 1500s, started in the time of Galileo and the scientists of Italy who called themselves the Illuminated Ones. Then were persecuted as Galileo was, and they had to go underground, and it resurfaces down the road in Germany, but it's the same highly educated part of the elite system. And if everybody doesn't think that Da Vinci or Galileo were of the elite, you wouldn't get that sort of education if you weren't, right? Only the elite did. So whether or not they may not have been in the royal family, but they're in that extended royal family that populated the whole elite of both the priest class, the religious classes, and the business classes, and the army classes, and all the governing classes, and owned all of the land. So, and they would sponsor each other if they were happy with sort of developing the knowledge of that knowledge cult, because they believe, they're the Gnostic religion. They always have been. It's the same religion that comes from before the flood, and the same religion Nimrod imposed in 100 years after the flood, and the same religion that's coming in the end time. So nothing is new under the sun. So we need to understand prehistory to sort of understand what our adversaries are up to. And so the Illuminati are working at those sort of levels. Now, we want to enter in that Freemasonry, like Illuminati, they are a trunk organization. So imagine these branches now coming in. So let's say Freemasonry, you would have a branch that's coming out of the trunk. And so these would be non-adept level kinds of organizations, but initiatory nonetheless. So Elks Club, Lions Club, there's
Moose Lodge.
Yeah, they're everywhere, right? And they would have their representatives on those councils running it to run again, more as a, let's say, disguise, and maybe looking for new people to invite into the Masonic Lodge and to network and make money and things like that, and to control what's going on in the local towns and city, because they have a whole hierarchy that they will set up in terms of when a town was built. They would have a secret lodge there, and they would divide it into sort of 4 areas that would be like this cross with this white shading on each of the quadrants. And they would put like on the north and the south, they would have like a courthouse or a police station or a fire station. And then on 2 sides, they would have sponsored churches of a sort of like a monastery sort of style, but like the biggest, richest churches on the east and west. And that is their imprint on their authority on that town and the gates that enter it.
Wow.
And they set up they're all, as many as they can, probably I would say 90 to 100, maybe even 100% of the towns were all set up that way. And especially if you can get into the old section, you can look for those kinds of markers, and you're going to see them there. And then they would have a special location for sacrifices and rituals at night, usually an elm tree or an oak tree that they would have cut down in a sacred ritual, and then use that as an altar, usually by a water source.
So it's more than just like, hey, we're part of the PTA and we're part of city council. It's literally geographically laid out to facilitate a sort of almost like a convergence of power. I did want to interject something real quick, because you referenced a couple things that I think it would be beneficial for my listeners to just have an understanding of. Gary mentioned Mount Hermon. If you check inside the description box below this video, you'll find a link. I believe it's the one to the talk we did on the Book of Enoch. The Mount Hermon is significant inside there because that is where the
Hey,
original
Diane, good to
watcher
see ya.
angels, they go atop Mount Hermon. We have 200 angels that go there, and they swear an oath to indulge in a type of sin that is going to permanently damn them for all eternity, as well as their offspring. But it's done in a way to corrupt the bloodlines of men and to create the giants of old.
Hasn't been the same without you, Di. Glad you're here.
Nephilim. So that's one thing you need to be aware of here. The other thing is also he mentioned the sacred sciences, and he also mentioned we have 2 Enochs inside the Bible. We have sort of the if you look up inside actually in Gary's book, there's a fantastic chapter all about Enoch or Trismegistus, which is sort of this multi-version understanding of who he was. So in some areas he's called Hermes, some areas he's called Enoch. The Egyptians call him one thing, the Greeks call him something else. But the more to the point, there are 7 sacred sciences that came out of this knowledge that would have been passed on from God into Adam, which he would have then distributed to his children. Everything from an understanding in how to build, how to craft, how to work the land. And Enoch would have been one that had worked in a holy fashion to bring those understandings and those sciences down to his posterity, whereas we have the Enoch from the line of Cain. One is from the line of Seth, one's from the line of Cain. The one from the line of Cain would have been Enoch the evil, who had worked to corrupt those sciences. And so, as Gary mentioned, there's a counterfeit for everything within these secret societies and brotherhoods within the world. So, like he mentioned, that the Masonic Bible, they take certain scriptures from the King James Version of the Bible.
People are waking up to it, aren't they, Di?
And they're able to sort of kind of cherry pick and choose what they want, because it's all about shifting the perspective, looking just close enough to the authentic real thing that people mistake it for being the authentic real thing. So those are just a couple terms that you need to sort of bear in mind here, is that Mount Hermon is significant for the angels that fell, and the 7 sacred sciences are very significant to these orders and the corruption of them to mankind.
Yeah, good stuff. Good explanations there. And, you know, that counterfeit of everything. And, you know, we sort of look forward to, are we in the fig tree generation and the beast empire, the 7th empire that's coming up out of the sea, just as the other ones came up out of the sea in Daniel 7. We have this multi-headed beast empire that's rising that Antichrist will expand out of. And they counterfeit that as well, and they say, and whether or not we are, they're always trying to push the end times at a faster time than the ordained time, but they'll accept the ordained time, which they'll have to. But they call that entering the time of the Leviathan system, and that we are in that Leviathan system now that you see in this sort of globalist march to bring about this empire. And how that relates as that sort of very fine technical counterfeit that they like to do is that if you look at this multi-headed dragon that comes out of the sea, it's very similar to a Leviathan that has multiple heads that God killed or Yahweh killed in prehistory, like Baal would have been accredited with, or you know, you have a Marduk, which would be another one. Indra was another one. They just have different names for the same creatures, whether it's Lotan, whether or not it's or Yam, whether or not it's Verta. Every culture has the same recollection. They just have a polytheist slant to it. So this Leviathan that was killed had multiple heads, and that there will be a Leviathan, as the book of Isaiah talks about, that is slain in the end time. And so when we look at the Leviathan, the female was killed in prehistory, and the male will be killed in the end time. And I think this is what I call like a dual allegory. So I think it's an allegory for Satan. Satan would have had a consort, so expect the resurgence of the mother goddess worship in the end time. That would be certainly with the Antichrist relationship, which would have been the consort of Satan, because Satan is believed to be the Leviathan in the occult. So this is the Leviathan system that is coming. And so it is the same imagery that's going to be used, just they have a different sort of outcome that they believe is going to happen. They believe there's going to be a 1,000-year reign, but this millennium will be reigned over by Antichrist, just as Hitler tried to bring about. Because nothing new is under the sun. They've been trying to do this all throughout history, just as Nimrod tried to enter into heaven. Antichrist will, and actually will drag down some of the starry host at the midpoint of the last 7 years in the war in heaven that's recorded in Revelation 12. So it's important to understand what they believe and where they're going with this, so that we can better communicate to Christians and wake people up, and non-Christians and wake people up, that times perhaps is running short if we are indeed in that fig tree generation. So it's important to understand those kind of terms. Now, you can branch, you have a descending hierarchical order. So there'll be groups answering to other groups and branching out in several different ways. And they'll have multiple of these types of organizations that go all around the tree, right? So it's a large network at the grassroots level and into communities. That includes, as you were talking about, into church societies. That includes school societies. That includes organizing.
Diane, it seems to be the athletes that are dying the quickest with this monkey virus. So, wow. So the more healthier you are, your body is, the more you're going to die. That's what it sounds like.
Like Scouts and Cubs and the Girl Guides. Everything that has that organizational hierarchy sort of rule to it is their system. The system that was introduced in the Bible to us is a flat system. So when you had like the temple in Jerusalem in the time of Israel, you had, yes, synagogues around the country, but it wasn't a hierarchy. They operated somewhat autonomously, and then they had one central site of worship where the Sanhedrin ruled, but they only had a certain amount of influence kind of outside of Jerusalem and would work through those systems. So it was a very, very flat system. But when you have the homogenization of Christianity into the Roman system with Constantine and Mithraism, or Mithraism, as some people call it, and Egyptian religion imagery being invoked, you now get this very large hierarchical organization versus this flat system with the Roman Church. And unfortunately, Protestantism creates this hierarchical system as well in many of the churches. And that's a sign that you may want to have a harder look at who's running those organizations.
Very much so. Absolutely. So I had a question. Now, within, because my grandfather was a 32nd degree Mason. I don't believe he was adept. As you mentioned the word adept inside there. Would adept signify that there is an even deeper level, like, because you mentioned like there's 33rd degree and then there's 33rd degree adept. What's the difference between those two?
Well, they're basically lied to for the most part under the 33rd degree.
Wow. So it's like this big bill, okay, you're serving your community, you're doing good for your, the people around you, but it's all smoke and mirrors.
And so the requirement is to join, is what they say, is you only have to believe in a God. It doesn't matter which one, but it has to be a God that you believe in. But they don't tell you who the God they're going to worship until you get to be an adept level. That would be sort of one of the lies. So that's one of the secrets that they provide, along with other secrets that sort of overturns every preconceived conclusion. And so do they learn some superficial meanings to the allegories, but it's not the roots to the allegory. It's not the full meaning. It's kind of the pablum, because they're considered mundane at that time. They're considered like non-invited people, and mundane is inferior. They have not been told the knowledge because they haven't earned that right yet. And you only earn that right beginning at the adept level. Now, 32nd degree, you'll see a lot of people's, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but you'll see a number of people who might call themselves a 32nd degree adept. So it's one of two things that are going on. One is they're lying because you can't be an adept unless you're a 33rd degree, but there's an exception clause. So for the royals, the ones of pure blood, and ones that will be raising Antichrist and the multiple Antichrists that will be all levying to try and take over the world. But there can only be one. That's the main thing to keep in mind. But they're initiated from childhood in the royal bloodlines. They become an adept before they're an adult. They're not allowed to take an adept title until somewhere between 25 and 30 years old. And so a lot of them will use the 32nd degree adept title. So if they're a pure blood, they take that title. And I actually was interviewed by one who said, well, what would you say if I was a 32nd degree adept? I said, well, you're either, you're not an adept and you're just lying, or you're a pure blood. And I said, my suspicion is based on this show, and your commentator is you're a pure blood. What bloodline are you from? Which of course he refused to sort of answer, and basically, well, no, I just wanted you to know you've been interviewed by 32nd degree adept and what your reaction would be to that. So so he was, yeah, so that's where you would get that term. So you want to be able to qualify them.
So then I guess because okay, so we understand it. Freemasonry would be the most bottom rung on that sort of that pyramid structure.
Yep.
After them, what comes next? Say you've gone through
That's the Illuminati.
Okay,
that's the Illuminati. But the adepts at the Freemasonic level have a specific assignment in bringing about the world government. And so their assignment is to influence politics, number one. And of course, that fits in with that grassroots level of organization, the grassroots levels of a party. And to be able to dominate that party with this quote unquote establishment, so that they give you basically the same coin, just two different faces of the same party. So that's why they're dead set against populist movements, because they can't control a populist movement, but if they can control the central part, they can control how a country, a province, municipality, a county would be run. So that's where they're focused at. The second part is that they are very heavily involved with the army. So if you look at the creation of the United States, George Washington was a Freemason, right? And most of his generals and colonels were Freemasons. In fact, there's a lot of Freemasons who were involved in creating the Constitution and things like that. So you see that sort of cabal of that grassroots elite level setting up a system that's designed to protect them, a constitution set up to protect them, a constitution that's set up to turn on Christians when the time is right. And we're seeing that today.
There's even a lot of imagery I've noticed. The Fall Brothers from Fourth Watch Films, they did a film, Belly of the Beast, and it's alarming the amount of imagery that surrounds George Washington, almost in sort of this deified state. Like even going as far as like him sort of like shirtless up in the clouds, very well deformed, Adonis-like chest, and he's
like what's in what is it, the House of Congress where they have that on the ceiling?
And then they have
tied into godhood. That's their belief system, that they've risen to be a god like Osiris.
That is so wild. So then moving on, I guess, from the Illuminati, you mentioned.
Well, let's move into the Illuminati.
Right. Sorry, I guess meant that's more what I meant, because I remember when we had talked a little bit before this about there was this hierarchical structure, and you have like one side can really concerning themselves with the army and politics, but then there was like a world banking aspect of it, and then there was one that was right down to the cultural level. I'd love to learn more about that.
That's higher on the Thelemic tree. So, and we'll get there. So with the Illuminati, they're the next rung up, right? Probably to about 5th degree. And they have branch organizations that answer into their part of the trunk. It's a trunk organization. So Skull and Bones is a trunk organization. Or branches is an Illuminati organization that branches into the trunk organization, and it's there to make sure that the Illuminati bloodlines, because you're moving up as you're moving up to that degree level, you're having more generations and more of the bloodline, and they're ensuring that they are being broken into assignments and being educated into those assignments, because once you're into the bloodlines at that level, everybody who's born in the family has a specific agenda that they are to perform throughout their whole lives and are trained for from the young, and continues through the Ivy League universities in the US, because they are going to be used to be involved in politics, but in a more grander sort of kind of politics. Wow. And so and I'll get to that in a second. But to give another type of organization that answers into the Illuminati is the Bohemian Grove organization, and they give the blessings as to who can be running for the leaders of the president in the United States, or the great leaders of the country, because they're positioning for the world. So the agenda of the Illuminati is twofold. One is to bring about world government, and then the second one is to destroy Christianity. And so you now have organizations that people in the Skull and Bones will move into, like the CFR and the Trilateral Commissions, and all of these ones that are now working on a worldwide scale to help bring about world government. And so you have all of these kinds of organizations that are working on those two levels. So any organization that you see that is working towards destroying Christianity, let's say like our education system, at the top levels, we write the doctrines, are probably going to be Illuminati.
So I want to just put this image up on the screen real quick. This is from the book by Anthony C. Sutton. This is America's Secret Establishment. It's all about the Skull and Bones Society. But what Gary was talking about there, sort of the magnitude of their orders and what they're involved in. This is I guess for the Skull and Bones Society, how they relate.
Hi, Trey. It's good to see you.
It's wild how the tendrils of a lot of these groups reach out. And like Gary was already talking about, the aim is essentially to subvert the truth, destroy Christianity, and bring about this globalistic world order, this globalist agenda. We're talking about like getting under all of the same currency, under a unifying doctrine or belief structure. It's wild to even.
And guys, all this stuff, it's only a year or two away. Everything they're talking about here, we know we're in the last 7 or 8 years, so all this is going to happen now. It's so stunning.
We note that there are places within these various organizations where we have something as insidious as how the Skull and Bones Society, if you guys can read that there, how they controlled early development of the Soviet Union. And we're talking about wars being funded by gargantuan families with very deep pockets. And we're not talking just about like one side of the war, but both sides of the war. We're talking about very curated things in not just our nation's past and present, but the world over. So like it seems that there's like the interconnections, they're just so wide.
And to add a little bit more onto those bones, a little more flesh on it, is the intellectual dynamite to create communism sort of was envisioned and created at the Rosicrucian level and then handed to the Illuminati to implement based on their world agenda. But it also has a second agenda. It was designed to get rid of rival bloodlines. So they called it social masonry. And social masonry is the education that Lenin and Trotsky received to create communism in the Communist Manifesto, or Hitler and his National Socialism Manifesto. And so communism was launched to bring down what the Western European bloodlines perceived as a rival bloodline and a more pure bloodline, and amongst some significant disputes, whatever they are, it's been sort of lost. I'm sure it's known at the high levels of the royals and Masonic societies, but they decided that they would sick this virus onto the czars in Russia. And of course, that whole bloodline was wiped out, although Putin would say he's part of that Putyanin bloodline that comes out of the Scythians or the Tuatha De Danann, out of Kiev and the original czars, and the branch of the Vladimir the Great, setting up of the Putyanin dynasty in Moscow, which the Romanovs are a junior shoot, like the Plantagenet is a junior shoot of the Anjou, so it's a junior shoot via marriage that the Romanovs took over, but still with links of bloodlines back to the Putyanin. That's who Putin believes he is, and he's trying to recreate that empire and rival dynasty, which is why Kiev is so important to him. So you start to understand the things behind the scenes, evangelism movement at the end of World War I, and it sort of brought down the Kaiser rival dynasty of the Tuatha De Danann and the bloodlines of Central Europe. And then they launched communism into China. That brought down the Xi bloodline, or the Li bloodline, from the original Xia dynasty, XIA, because that was another ancient, powerful bloodline that was a rival to world domination. So they have rivalries within, as to, because there can only be one. It's like the old Highlander movies, right, where they have to have these sort of allegorical giants dueling and taking each other's heads and bringing in all of their energy so that there can be one that can rule the world. So that's part of the quickening. That's part of the fairy aspect of the Tuatha De Danann allegories that they're overlaying into that series. But so, yeah, they launched this for an ability to bring about a world government, because they felt that they could not bring this about with such strong rivals and a more pure pedigree. And so you see those bloodlines resurging now, which is why they don't want to accept the will of the Europeans. They want a world government, they want a larger role, and they're not going to put up with lower bloodline of royals and be, like a vassal state to them. They're just not going to do that. So that's part of what we're going to see to bring this tussling of wars and rumors of wars. That's going to bring about
No way!
Religion and
no way, Diane. Oh my Lord, 2,700. Oh man.
World government attention.
Diane, that's flabbergasted me. That's really stunned me. Wow. And Mike from around the world said that was going to happen. He said the volcano in Italy was going to blow. This is getting really serious.
So there's infighting within their ranks too, much like we saw much like we saw during the conquest of Canaan. Wow. We hear that you had Nephilim tribes and Rephaim tribes that were literally cannibalizing each other inside there.
Yeah, because there can only be one. It's part of their DNA. And they don't want to be subservient to other bloodlines. Now, there's alliances and things like that, but even in Rome, I mean, the assassinations that went on with the Caesars and stuff, it was perpetual, because that's what they do, right? It's just part of that whole sort of culture. So that's kind of the Illuminati sort of quickly, and you could spend all night just on the Illuminati and different organizations. But as you move move up the Thelemic tree, you're now into the Rosicrucians. And the Rosicrucians, you know, they're going to be, you know, probably in around the 6th, 7th degrees at the bottom level. And the
Diane, 2,500 earthquakes a day. That's got to be Planet X, hasn't it? It's got to be Planet X doing that. There's nothing else that could be doing that as far as I can see. Wow.
Crucian is split into 2 parts. One being those ones rising up through the degree system from Freemasonry to Illuminati and into the lower levels of the Rosicrucian, because they're still not very pure in the bloodline. They're less pure, let's put it that way. So the top half is populated by the purebloods. And so that'll start to make sense as I move up the tree and add some more information. But the Rosicrucians, they've been in charge of their Gnostic religion and keeping it. So Gnosticism is sort of the Western religion. It's the same pantheon all around the world, but that's the version that they have. They're trying to bring about a global religion, a global Gnostic religion, and bring it back home. Even the monotheist religions that they say went rogue at the time with Moses, who they say brought the religion of Heliopolis to Israel, and that only later with the monarchy did it go rogue into monotheism. But what they're trying to do there is cut monotheism off with Islam, Judaism, and Christianity at Moses, because they're all linked there, and say this is the true religion, and then do things that will convince people and sort of bring down the authority of those organizations and lap them into the umbrella religion, polytheism for which will show up as Babylon first, and then Antichrist for the end time. But I kind of digress. So they're in charge of looking after the religion. They're in charge of looking after their history, after their genealogies, and they work in the entertainment mode as well, and in the literature modes as well. So writing movies as it came about that. Let's say Disney. Disney was more than Freemason. He would have been Rosicrucian based on the writings and capturing of the fairy tale mythos, which is occultism, which is a part of the allegories, as I talk about in the first book extensively, in the matriarchal bloodlines. The fairy tales have been promoted unlike no other by Walt Disney, right? And now we see a whole bunch of other things that it sort of exposes their sort of true polytheist belief system. And again, if you're a polytheist, that's fine. I'm a monotheist, so we're not really going to see eye to eye on some things, some significant things.
Just a few.
But we can, just a few, but we can look at what happened in history. We have a different lens, but we can agree on certain events and things like that, just as we can discuss what's going to happen in the future, but have a different view of that outcome. So, so the Rosicrucians are a very, very important role. And so linking in a conversation that we had a few minutes ago about this 32nd degree adept.
Yes.
When I talk about influencing Hollywood and giving them all the information that they need to create all of these occult stories and history, this begins with the ancient classics in Greece and probably before that. It includes the Roman like Ovides. It includes Shakespeare writing his great classics, which is all occult history and genealogies. They even have fairies in there, and King Oberon and Titania, King of the Fairies, and a female Nephilim. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And Midsummer's Night Dream, and all these little people, and all these other things going on. Well, Francis Bacon created 2 writing societies, and he's a Rosicrucian. And he's the second most powerful individual in time of Queen Elizabeth and then King James, who he created a language for King James to create the King James Bible so that they could use that as a platform for secret societies and their oaths in sort of plain sight. And
wow, I never knew that.
Put it inside the larger Polychronicon of their oral history that they've now got written down. It used to be all in oral traditions. And so they look at a lot of the ancient history, and they look at it as being, they agree on it, they just have different meanings to it. And so they'll adopt portions of the Bible into the Polychronicon, which is why, in part, why initiates are told to learn certain verses throughout the Bible, right?
Sure.
It's going to become more important as they move up. And so he created the writing group, the Helmet Society, and the Spear Shaker Society. And it was writing groups designed to create a new language to be the world dominant language and make it into a very sort of poetic language that would be suitable for a Babel-like language, a single language for the world, which is why Mighty Prince James, as he's called, mighty as in gibbering, who also wrote a trilogy on demonology, who would have been initiated from childhood, so he would have been an adept. So when you see him with images being, knighted and promoted in a Masonic society, that's just for ritual. He was way above that before he went in there, but it's part of the merging of England and Scotland at that time, right? And they're going to bring Freemasonry with them as part of that organizational control. And then that organizational control crosses into continental Europe through the Jacobite movement, and then to the US through people that they sponsored to help bring about the United States, right? And so you have this Spear Shaker Society, which is taken from Apollo and Athena, where they would have a spear and shake it to create disasters, to punishment, and things like that.
Mhm.
And Bacon, in a lot of circles, is thought to have been the real Shakespeare, whom Shakespeare takes his name from, the Spear Shaker Society. So anyway, that's just one of the, but you can see that MO of crafting the entertainment and the literacy aspect. For people who can read, they get absorbed into this ancient history and the bloodlines, and they know what parts of that are important and what is that fairy tale narrative on the surface. You have to be adept to understand the allegories to understand the full meaning. So now you roll that forward on that 32nd degree aspect, and you have Tolkien and Lewis, who were educated at Oxford, so they're of money, and that they're in the Inkling Society, which is a branch of the Golden Dawn Rosicrucian Society, and it's a writing guild to teach writers the craft of writing, but they already have the knowledge, but a mundane individual can't be part of a Rosicrucian society because you have that hierarchical order. And there's no record of them being Masons, and everybody says, well, they can't be. So they're Christians, even though they write nothing but occult writings and history and genealogies. And they call, each of them called the Bible a fairy tale. And what they mean by that is you have to understand the interpretive aspect, the allegorical aspect that only adepts would understand to understand the new meaning. And that the Bible is what they coined as a eucatastrophe. And what that means in that style of writing that they were a part of, I won't go into all the different sort of technical names of the style of writing that they were in, but it's that mythical sort of poetic style of writing in the history, is that a fairy tale has a happy ever ending to it. And that's so the hero doesn't suffer the real fate. He does, but to make the reader happy, there's a happy ending to it. And they say the Bible is the same way, and Jesus is the classic eucatastrophe. And that he did not die on the cross, that he was a mortal prophet. That's why they graft him in as like a Confucius or a Buddha, into one of the ones sent on the way to lead humankind to godhood. And that they'll use things like the sign that Jesus gave that generation was the sign of Jonah. And they said, you know what that sign, you know what the Jonah sign is? That's where Jonah's in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. You don't believe he was actually in a whale for 3 days and 3 nights. It's a fable. That's the sign. The resurrection is a fable. And just as Jonah wasn't in the belly for 3 days and 3 nights, neither was Jesus. And only what he had said has meaning, and that you have to be an adept to understand what he said.
Wow, that's like the equivalent of somebody saying, "Oh, unless you read the Quran in its original written language, it doesn't count as reading it," or unless you read the Old Testament in Hebrew, it doesn't count as reading it.
Yeah.
Which I find to be a crock of nonsense.
I do want to be helpful if you can get the nuances of the original language, but not the only way to read it. So my point is that they were adepts from childhood. They come from bloodlines. And so I do a 4-part series on Tolkien and Lewis in terms of their writings, and then I do a series, 2-part series. One is on the bloodlines of Lewis, and the other one is the bloodlines of Tolkien, because they say they're just average Joes, but they can't be because they went to Oxford and they were in the Rosicrucian Society. So I trace their bloodlines back to the Royals, and it's a rather interesting series to read. So that's what the Rosicrucians do.
So yeah. I have a question, like with like specifically on somebody like a Tolkien or a Lewis. And you mentioned within the original royal bloodline families how they're sort of assigned their role right from birth, and like, oh, they may do certain things, but this is essentially your sleeper cell role, is what you're going to be activated to do for the rest of your life. For just going down the rabbit hole on Masonic lodges and down the Illuminati rabbit hole, down the rabbit hole of Skull and Bones, you find a lot of information talking about MK Ultra and mind control. Do you know the prevalence of that within some of these orders?
Yeah, I think, as you look at the dilution of the bloodlines that have happened because of blood diseases. Right? You can't intermarry. You're going to get hemophiliac disease, Habsburg jaw disease, all sorts of diseases. And that there was a fertility issue with the Rephaim, and the terrible ones, as you take that back to Hebrew, where you get the larger definition. They're also defined not only as giants, but as ones who were childless and infertility. And so they were unlike the Nephilim before the flood, who could multiply in great numbers. And so you don't get a lot of females mentioned after the Bible. We get a few, like Timnah, who marries Eliphaz to create a new elven fairy dynasty. Duke, as you take that back to Aleph in Hebrew, and part of the mythos of the fairy bloodline, created the Amalekites, named after the Amalekite giants. And they went to live into Petra amongst the Amalekite giants. And so you have a few mentions, but seemingly the infertility issue is not many females born and not many born to those females. So that's why they start, and I write about when they start a new dynasty, it's a pure blood female to start a brand new dynasty. And they were very few indeed that had that type of purity to the bloodline. So they had to intermarry throughout the years, and you have this sort of dilution. Now, one of the things that they believe in their belief system is the hive mind.
You mentioned that when we were talking about Enoch, actually.
Yeah, and that in the hive mind, and just as you get with the Rh negative sort of traits, one of them is more, telepathy, more connection to alien phenomena, occult phenomena, and that sort of tie-in, but it's sort of a weak sort of connection. So it's believed in their belief system that at one time, all the giants were of one mind, the hive mind. And the queen bee is that mother goddess that's going to be coming back, like in the beehive.
Okay, that's interesting. All the giants had a hive mind. I didn't know that.
Right, it's that sort of important to them at the top levels of their worship in the secret societies at the adept level. and that they could do great things because they could communicate like the Borg, like the high Borg cube, right?
Yep.
And all the imagery that's going into all of that with that sort of queen. And so before I link that into the Ultra experiments, one of the things that God delivered for Israel in the time of the Exodus and the conquest was hornets. And 3 times he said he would supply hornets to deliver up the giants and the hybrid giants to them.
Paul Begley's got all the hornets.
Hornets are the natural enemy of the bee.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That is not a coincidence.
Not at
And
all.
so,
Wow.
not at all. I mean, it absolutely discombobulated them. They were just, they were just attacking each other, running around like crazy. It just totally broke up because they didn't have the ability to communicate. They're operating mostly on a group level. Now to have to work independently would have been mass confusion, right? And that's part of how they were able to slay the giants. And so roll that forward to the end time, you have these 10 kings, had bloodline kings, as I make the case for. And in like mind, they hand their power over to Antichrist. And you get a few references to the Bible in like mind where you have this sort of extra body connection. But there, it's specifically as they bring back in, the 10 kings that are working like mind, now they're going to hand all that power over to Antichrist to bring about their rendezvous with destiny and the showdown with God. So this is a concept that they want to bring back because it was so valuable to them, because they believe you could do great things working in a like mind. And so experiments like Ultra were designed to, can we somehow reconnect that chemically so that we can be more effective in how we work together?
Wow. And it's so interesting to think. I posited this idea on one of my streams, I guess it would have been 2 weeks ago now, on Pulpit Madness. And it was the idea, and I can't remember who wrote about this. I thought it was C.S. Lewis who had originally written about this, but I could be incorrect in that. But he had talked about, he said, imagine now, we're in this mortal coil, we're in this body, our mood, our mental state affected by how tired we are, what we've had to eat. Are we fueled on the right sort of nutrients? Did we have a fight with a spouse? What is our workload like? All these things that weigh heavily on our mind, and they can work against us or work for us. And he said, imagine suddenly you stepped into the realm of eternity. You're now into the next life. You're now residing with God and the angels, and to have all of the impediments melt away instantly, and have in an instant monumental universal clarity, understanding of literally everything in just a fraction of a second's time. I wonder if, on the one hand, I wonder if that's going to be very much the case, to suddenly have an understanding of, wow, when Jesus said, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Did he have a relationship with me before the foundation of the earth? Like he said, I called you before the foundation of the earth. And it makes me wonder, would that sort of be the same sort of mental acumen that the Nephilim were operating under?
One. A counterfeit one, obviously. And that in the end time, expect that to come through with the mark of the beast and the connection to the divine essence and the Atma. That's another rabbit hole. But an extension of that mind control as well is not only being able to connect through telepathy, but exercise power over others through telepathy in that hive system where you have the worker bees who just do what they're told.
And that's the crux of it right there. Well, that's the crux of it right there, because what I find to be very, very interesting, when you look at the world at large, and people, the big argument is they want complete autonomy. They want bodily autonomy, mental autonomy, but they also have these tribalistic instincts where they want to be, they're begging to.
Diane, I wouldn't buy his album though. I'm telling you that.
be subverted through identity politics. Let me assign a membership and let me align myself with a group of people that think this way. If I'm labeled as such, then clearly I subscribe to all these ideas. I have a very, very sneaking suspicion, and I don't think I'm wrong at all in this. You look before the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, before we have the new covenant forged, when Jesus actually finally said, it is finished, and committed his spirit into God's hands. And then we had that new covenant form where no longer do we have a visitational aspect of the Holy Spirit, but now he's an indwelling presence all throughout the Old Testament. And then into the New Testament, with more in the New Testament, you see it with Jesus having to cast out demons all the time, because we were vessels that the Holy Spirit could come upon and then leave based on his intentions and how close we had drawn to God. So now you have this, for those who have become Christian, you can no longer be possessed. You can be oppressed, but not possessed. I have a very, very sneaking suspicion that when people take the mark of the beast, see, they'll probably be almost like a demo. I imagine like one of those world stage type things where the guy comes out with the headset on, he's got the little slideshow in the background going, so why do we here at Beast International, we've got such and such and such, telepathy, you want it, telekinesis, you got it, phasing in and out of reality, you want it, you got it. You sign up today, you join this, and boom, you're part of our organization. You're one of our members. I imagine people are going to go inside there duped on the one aspect of, wow, I stand to gain all this. But then once they make that sacrifice, suddenly their vessel is no longer able to contain the Holy Spirit anymore, because they will have committed that unpardonable sin. And now they're going to be puppeted for the rest of their waking hours by a demonic presence.
Well, let me just sort of quickly take that to another level of what you're talking about.
Take it away.
So this unlimited knowledge is part of godhood in polytheism and immortality, right? And so through the mysticism and the secret societies, you learn how to control this knowledge, of this unlimited knowledge, right? So that you can be worthy to be a god. So they have to supply this unlimited knowledge. And philosophy is an amalgamation of the first three of the seven sciences, and it becomes the theology of the Gnostic cult. And it guides all of the other seven sciences and is the arbitrator of all of the seven sciences. So it's the theological dynamite in the direction used through philosophy. That means in Greek, the love of wisdom, the love of Sophia. Sophia is the mother goddess in Gnosticism who creates the 12 archons, which God is considered one of those 12 archons and went rogue. And that this is part of that mother goddess aspect that's coming back, and that this is a counterfeit of the Holy Spirit that's supplying this knowledge, just as the Holy Spirit is considered wisdom in the New Testament. And you're going to see a movement more in Christianity to feminize the Holy Spirit, and they'll use that through Hebrew, where wisdom can be chakah, which is an AH suffix, which is a female suffix, but rooted in chakam, or hakam, no, it's chakam, as it's pronounced. And so an AH doesn't necessarily mean that it is the Holy Spirit would be, or wisdom as it's called in Proverbs, is necessarily a female trait of the Holy Spirit. It is just the language that's being communicated in, just as French has male and female in the language. But further, you have Elohim has a feminine aspect as well, Eloah. And it doesn't mean a female goddess, because that's just El. And if there's goddesses, it would be Elohim, small case. In Hebrew, Elohah is the demonstration of the power of God. So you would probably, in my opinion, people disagree with me who have a different view and are wanting people to understand the Holy Spirit as a feminine aspect, is the application of the wisdom. And then in the New Testament, where it says wisdom, whether or not it's the wisdom being provided for us in the end times, as Mark and Luke talk about, and the Holy Ghost, depending on which of those two versions that the Holy Ghost or the Spirit is going to provide us, the testimony in the tribulation. That word wisdom goes back to Sophia, so they'll use that as well, but that's just a Greek translation for what would have been written down in Hebrew, except that the language was written down in Greek because it's the state-sponsored language of the world. It's the beast language of the world, just as English was created to be the beast language of the world, at least from the bloodlines of the Stuarts.
Wow, I never knew that.
Wow, and you know, it's just funny. I'm just harkening back to what we talked about before about reading. Sorry, go ahead, continue.
I missed the ultimate point here. So,
sorry.
This divine essence and this unlimited knowledge is the counterfeiting of the Holy Spirit. And the only sin that is not forgiven through the atonement of Jesus is a blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And that will also have an ability to change your whole, because it's like a spirit entering in. Is how this happens. And it may not be directly from the Holy Spirit, but it'll be sent directly from Sophia or their mother goddess, but maybe something that's sent. And it has the ability with what it's doing to change your whole DNA, your whole gene system, your whole cell system, and at the quantum level, right from the building blocks upwards. So that on pretty much every account, once you take that mark of the beast, you're getting a whole list of consequences that were leading you to the lake of fire.
Man, and what was so saddening about that whole thing is you're going to have people that, because of a seared conscience that we read about inside the epistles to Timothy, they will walk into the lie willfully and compromise their entire eternity in doing so. And it's not just going to be them. They'll take others with them because of that group think, that group identity, that wanting and longing to be a part of some whole that's bigger than them. Suffice to say it, there's a sinister overplot that so many people just don't realize. And I mean, it's why we're doing the show tonight.
Yeah, well, they've run the world since the beginning, since the rebellion, right? Satan is the prince of this world, and he has his whole assembly ruling over this world, and his visible spurious offspring, and the fallen angelic spurious offspring is more accurately not Satan's offspring, because we don't have scripture for that. Some people say we do, but I tend to think otherwise. But I mean, they run the world, right? So this is going to run that large and that deep, and they've run it from the time of the creation of the giants. And so one of the main organizations, and there's lots of organizations, writing societies and things like that, different Rosicrucian societies. But there's one other one that enters in, at least at the beginning, at the Rosicrucian level. I think they now might answer into the Committee of 300, and I'll explain that splitting in a minute, is the Jesuits. So the Jesuits aren't at the apex. They are sponsored, in more recent times by the Italian sort of black nobility. But before that, they've sponsored a lot of popes through the older black nobility. There's two parts of the black nobility in Italy. And the older black nobility, the Juliagens, is very much connected to the Albigens and the rest of the Western sort of bloodline of these royals and descendants. And so the Jesuits were created to be the New Templars. And they're actually referred to as the New Templars. And Ignatius receives Mary apparitions that puts him on this course to change Catholicism from the inside to prepare for the new Babel, the Templar dream, to bring about the end time world religion. It needs to reform, and they work actively. I won't go through the complete Jesuit history, but now we have a Jesuit Pope that is working towards the universal religion and world government very actively. Yeah, so I mean, it's and he's the sort of the Black Pope of the Nostradamus prophecies. Like the Black Pope is the leader of the Jesuits versus the White Pope, which is sort of always known as the leader of Roman Catholicism. Now you have a Black Pope over top of all of Catholicism, and it's not necessarily made up of royals. I mean, distant bloodlines. Certainly, Ignatius was a Basque, and of royal nobility, and I cover the founders in the new book on that sort of bloodline. So just moving on to that, and a lot of people say, well, no, they're higher than the other organizations because they control everything. No, this is a takeover of polytheism over the Roman Catholic Church to answer into the larger system, just as Kabbalism is part of that system, but not the full controlling power. And that the Jesuits, in their beginning, they actually were joining, and they were created after the Illuminati. They were created after Freemasonry, after the major organizations after the fall of the Templars. They were created starting in 1520s and then formalized into, with a bull in about 1540, into the Jesuit order. And they were charged to take over the church, but also to take over the banking, which they did. And I won't go through all the details. I have a great series, and it's a great show to do a show just on the Jesuits and everything that they do and how they got control of the banking and to get control of the education within the church. Right? And to prepare it to be the centerpiece for the end time religion. It won't be the end time religion, but it'll be sort of that embryo is what they're, because it has to change its doctrine and everything else to get to the point where they want it to be. Outside the Roman Church, the Rothschilds were created to create the banking system outside the Roman Church. And it all connects back into Switzerland today through the Hospitallers, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But and the Rosicrucians, working with the Freemasons, also created the Royal Society that all education and science answers to this day as an organizational structure. They call themselves the last of the sorcerers and the first of the scientists. So when you get that Baconian language showing up as sorcerers in the book.
Yeah, there's nothing good about the Catholics, Susan. Nothing at all good.
Revelation, it's there for a reason. Believe me, that's the Hebrew word pharmakeia. So the alchemy of the drugs and things. So anyways, that Babylon uses to control the whole world. But again, that's what we could go forever down some of these rabbit trails. But when we're looking at the Rosicrucians, these are the type of organizations that they are intersecting with. But just as the Jesuits developed, and just as the banking system developed with the Rothschilds, even though they would have originally rooted into the Rosicrucians, they now root in one level higher, and that comes about this way. So at the fall of the Knights Templar, you have this central organization of the Royals, and the Priory of Sion was that senior organization with the junior adept order running the top of the Templars at the outside, just as you have that two parts to the Rosicrucian Society. That's the Priory of Sion society. The society, the Sion is another word for Mount Hermon, Deuteronomy 4, verse 42 or 43, and it's another double entendre and allegory that they're using. And so they crowned Baldwin II Anjou in 1118, after Baldwin I Anjou and de Bouillon, first leader and king of Jerusalem, they crowned Baldwin II Anjou, the king of Jerusalem, in a small priory in the Rock of Zion in Jerusalem, which is a title Antichrist they want to have as the Antichrist at the abomination, that as a successor. Current one who owns the that holds, let's say, the contested title of the King of Jerusalem title is King Philippe of Spain, son of Juan Carlos.
Catholics.
He holds the current Jerusalem title inherited from the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty. So von Habsburg of that dynasty has a claim as well. They don't recognize it. And then the
well done,
of
Susan.
Naples has
Well
a claim
done.
as well. All through the sort of descendancy and the passing on of the King of Jerusalem title. I won't bore everybody with, but there are rivals to this King of Jerusalem title, but the one that is sort of recognized in the higher groupings and most dominant grouping is the Bourbon family. So they want to, they want to be obviously one of the families that presents themselves as an Antichrist type figure. There are others, but so you have that crowning in 1118 for that King of Jerusalem title, but this is part of that whole Templar order that's answering to the senior barons, which is the Priory of Sion, who appoints these Kings of Jerusalem title. And so when you have a splitting of the elm tree in 1188 that separates the Priory of Sion with the Knights Templar, that's when they lost Jerusalem, and the Priory of Sion felt that the Templars lost their way. So they didn't protect the Templars when the King of France and the Pope overthrew the Templars. And so that central organization had to be sort of rebuilt. But the Priory of Sion starts its Grand Masters in 1188, and the Grand Masters before that would be starting with Godfrey de Bouillon, but that split sets them on two different paths. And this becomes the new Rosy Cross Order, the senior Rosy Cross Order, that takes that name on then. And by the time of the Knights Templar fall, the senior grouping that's now numbered at 33 of the Rosy Cross Order are actually going to try and negotiate with the Pope to reestablish the Templars in the Roman Church. But the Pope says, yeah, we're going to do that, but I'm going to put my people in place, not your people. And so they fled back sort of underground and away from the Pope. But that's the Rosy Cross Order that is going to resurface in 1323 with Robert the Bruce that I cover in the book, and the escaping adepts out of the Templars and under the protection of Bruce and the money of the St. Clairs, and they're going to form Freemasonry from those adepts. And then Bruce establishes the official Rosy Cross Order for these adepts, because they're royal bloodline knights that are part of this whole Rosicrucian order that is now starting to be sort of split away from the 33 invisible ones, as they would call themselves, just as the Invisible College is the other name for the Royal College, started by the Royal Society, started by Rosicrucians and Freemasonry. And they're going to expand that organizational structure from the 33 down to the Committee of 300, and then down to the Rosicrucians. So as you get that splitting away over time, and the Jesuits are set up by the black nobility through the Rex Deus of those 33 families that are trying to reestablish the Templars, they grab onto the Jesuits, who now I would say probably report up to the Committee of 300 families, and including some of the families that come out of the black nobility of Italy. And they sponsor Ignatius, a fellow by the name of Borgia, Francois Borgia, and he is going to fund the Borgia is a bloodline of popes. His grandfather was a pope, for example, and there's another pope in the Borgia. He's part of the black popes that are being elected through to run the Roman Church. And he is a Basque as well, and he is in the court of of the King of France, and a very powerful individual with a very powerful sort of bloodline. And he funds this whole order along with the King of Spain, and they lobby to get it established as a new order within the Roman Church to do the goals that we talked about earlier. By 1570, you have the third leader of the Jesuits, and it's Borgia. So the Grand Master of the Matessa order that was created by the King of Spain to take all of the assets so the Roman Church couldn't get it is now the leader of the Jesuit order, and working with King Charles and invading Spain, they get control of the banking system, and the Jesuits move that over to Switzerland, where the Knights Templar money went to the Knights of St. John.
Oh my
Who
gosh.
is the origination to the modern banking system, and why they have the white cross on their flag. And now the Rothschilds have their banking all centralized there as well. So all of it has come home. And so above the Rosicrucians are the Committee of 300 royal families. And so the Rothschilds now, because of that splitting, they would have been, when they were started, they would have been directly into the Rosicrucian order, right? But because they married in from as the Bauer family, they didn't change. They changed their name from Bauer to the Rothschilds in about 1810 when they set up the London Bank to sort of separate themselves from the Jewish sort of connection. And they were funded by the Royals to be the banking arm outside of the church. And so they've been funded all the ways, and they're the ones who set up the stable of agents in North America with, the Rockefellers, JP Morgan, all the banking, American banking companies, that were sort of new world banking as opposed to transplanted banking.
Susan, he's not a 33rd degree Mason, is he?
Funded them all, and all through just the sort of bloodlines, and we call them their stable of agents. And so with the Committee of 300, then not only do you have the Rothschilds that enter into them, but you also now have probably the Jesuits answering more to the direct bloodlines, right? The 300 families. I won't go into all of the details of how they come up with their allegorical 300, but there's a lot of information there. They control the World Bank. They control the Davos Group. They control all the economic leaders and sponsor all of the world trade agreements. And anything that is financial funnels through the Committee of 300 around the world. So when you see the G20 and the B20 come together, you're getting between the two of them, you get 85 and 90%, one of the world's trade and one of the world's GDP, and they're all meeting together now, trying to establish this new beast system in this world government, right? And passport systems. Yeah.
Now we're talking serious money. Like when people will say more money than God, like we're talking that level of money here.
Well, more money than people know of that's in the world. So when you have new money come in, let's say like Bill Gates or Elon Musk, they're going to wear a white hat or a black hat, but they all sort of have the same goal in mind. They're called, just like you have white magic and black magic. It's sort of that eternal dualism. The white hats apparently have a little bit more fondness for humans than the black hats, but they still want this world government and everything else, and they still worship
Black Pope, White Pope.
Pantheon of gods. So still polytheism. And so the new money is trying to do things. So they'll go to like the Bilderbergers organization, which also answers into the Committee of 300, and they sit at the top, and then the new money are the people at the bottom, and they get together once a year and get their marching orders as to, if you want to have your children intermarry, this is what you need to do to advance the New World Order, or the Nephilim World Order, as I like to call it, that they're trying to sort of bring about. And so this is the organization that is the one that we really sort of need to be focused on, because this is where all the money, this is the money thing I was going to talk about. So Bill Gates has a lot of money. Elon Musk has a lot of money. I don't care who they say is the richest person in the world. That is small potatoes. So when I was doing research and trying to get information on it, it was hard, but there was consistent sort of effort in about year 2000 when I was doing the research. Somewhere between 300 and 500 trillion at that time was the off the books money, not on the books.
Oh
So
my
you can only
gosh.
imagine what that might be worth today, right? And
night,
this
Susan.
is the
Good
wealth
night.
that's behind it. And so when they do the Great Reset that they're planning through all of these different committees, is that people who have debts, they'll have their debts forgiven in a year of Jubilee. So it'll be a religious type of thing, but not based on necessarily the Old Testament and Jewish tradition, but more on the Assyrian tradition, because it's a beast empire thing, right? You have to understand the context all the time. And so it's similar, but it has different rules. Just as if you think you're going to get Old Testament law under the Noahide laws, it's going to be like that they introduce in their Babylon system. It'll be very ascetic, but it'll be more like the Essenes. It'll be more like Opus Dei, which is Christian masonry within the church. It would be more like the monastic orders within the Roman church, that type of asceticism that's Jesus and Paul sort of speak against in the New Testament. So when we're looking at this Great Reset, if you have debt, that's forgiven, but now you're not allowed to own anything. And for people who may not have debts or can pay off the demand, they're going to just take your money away as part of the Great Reset, just as they did in Malta. They just went into people's accounts and took whatever they wanted in the 2008. That was one of the trial runs for what they're planning in the Great Reset. And that if you're an oligarch, let's say like Gates or Elon or any other ones you may have, they're going to lose all their money too. But because they've done their job, unlike the average middle class who may be debt-free, who will not own anything after all of this is done as well, is that those oligarchs will be funded by this off-the-books wealth in the great restructuring of the monetary system, and will become fabulously wealthy working in an oligopoly basis, because corporations are part of the beast system. It's not free enterprise. It is a system set up for oligopolies, as we see transnational corporations, and as a perversion.
Okay, Phil, good night, mate.
So in this system, you're going to see the whole middle class wiped out, and only the required level of, and using in ancient terms in the ancient four-class system and in the ancient feudal system, you'll have a small middle class that would be like blacksmiths or bakers or tailors to supply things to the upper two classes, and then you'll have the completely slave and working class at the bottom. So the Great Reset is not to have you own anything, to live in slum landlords where all of these oligarchs own everything and the royals own everything, including the land, including the fish, including the deer. It's that system that's coming about that they're going to bring about. And so they need people like Biden to bankrupt the US. They need people to continue to be materialistic and go completely into debt so that they have an excuse to bring this about. That's how they're going to start to introduce the beast system in a significant way.
Wow.
Now, and again, that's a very, very large organization. And above that is you have the Council of 33 Families that we've talked about. That's getting sort of the more ancient of the last 2,000 years Western families. And then you have the 13 families at the top. And within the royal families of the 13 families, the 33, and to a lesser degree, but lower sort of orders and branches of these orders, you have populated these branch organizations of these royal bloodlines are royal orders. So again, I won't go through all of them, but when we talked about the Anjou, for example, there's two orders of the Anjou. One is run by Juan Carlos, and the other one is run by von Habsburg. It's the Golden Fleece Order. People have probably heard that. The Golden Fleece is, well, maybe they haven't, but they can Google it. They'll find out about it in a hurry. The Golden Fleece is an allegory out of Greece, that this fleece was the fleece that made the clothes of the gods and the demigods that would perpetuate their lives in the physical state, in the physical world for longer. And so all of these royal bloodlines at the top have these top level royal orders like the Golden Fleece. So the Queen Elizabeth, for example, and King Charles III now would take that seat, has a seat in the Golden Fleece Order, because one of the main bloodlines and part of that whole alliance. Just as the Queen Elizabeth and now King Charles III would have sort of the Protestant side of the Knights of St. John Order. So the Knights of St. John Order also answers into these royal bloodlines, because that was set up within the Roman Church, and to be the leaders of the top, you had to be not the first son of a royal, but one of the second or third sons. So still as pure as you can get. And of course, they would have, unlike any other sort of society other than CERN, who is very similar, would answer in, and the CERN would answer into the Rosicrucians because of the technology and the science and the things that they're doing there. Both CERN and the Knights of St. John have status at the UN. They can vote on bills, they sign on things, they're in groups, they can speak at the UN if they so choose. Only 2 groups in the world outside of nations have that sort of capability to do that. That's how powerful that they are.
So I've got a good question.
So, yeah.
Like we talked a lot about some of like the 4 nation families and stuff. We talked about some of the families here. So I guess as secret societies go, for a lot of the politicians here in the States that were involved directly with the Skull and Bone Society coming out of Yale, where does Skull and Bone Society fit within this whole thing? Because I know that there was a lot of funding that went on back during World War II for the Soviets, and then we also had the Bolshevik Revolution. Where do they fit into this?
Yeah, we talked about that as funneling into the Illuminati. It's a junior Illuminati order.
Gotcha. Okay, so then I guess would you say that
they operate at the university levels in Europe and in the US and other places to funnel people into Illuminati causes? So they have bloodlines, but they're not the super pure bloodlines.
Gotcha. Would it be a fair thing for me to say then, within this multi-tiered, overarching beast organization that all of these fraternities and orders are conglomerately a part of, would it be fair for me to say that even within their ranks, you have a tremendous amount of just useful idiots who even they don't understand the full scope of what they're doing?
Not at the upper levels.
Okay.
I mean, when you're at the top level of the Rosicrucians and up, you're an adept before you become an adult, or you're cast out of the family.
Wow. So
we don't have a choice. At the lower levels, you can choose to be part of the organizations and the occult religion or not. But at the pure blood level, it's very difficult to get out.
Well, I can imagine it's probably you're with us or death kind of a thing at that point.
Now, I'm going to give you a name of an organization of one of these high level 13 family organizations, and you could sort of link in the original Sinclairs, which are the St. Clair family that changed their name to St. Clair after expropriating Normandy. So this is the Norse Rollo bloodline. And about 910, when they expropriated Normandy, changed their name to the name of the treaty. The Treaty of St. Clair was the treaty. And so this Rollo bloodline has dynastic kings that take their bloodlines back to Odin in the North belief system. And so the Royal Masonic Order for the Norse kings is, you'll like this, the Knights of the Seraphim.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And you can Google that and you can see their necklaces and imagery, and so.
And it's by no mistake that they chose that. They knew full well what they were doing.
or
Wow.
yeah, just like the Golden Fleece Order. All of they reflect who they are within their imagery in their names.
Wow. I would so we're sort of coming to the end of our time here. I do have a few questions that the chat has asked. I'd love to sort of like kind of rapid fire take them if we can. I don't want to keep you past our allotted time if you have to go right away, unless you can spare a couple extra minutes. I would love to have you come back on the show and delve even further into this, because I feel like even though we've covered a lot of ground, I feel like there's still so much deeper we could go into some of these areas. My wife actually wanted me to ask you. Her maiden name was Stewart, and spelled Stewart, and her grandmother was part of the Eastern Stars, and I believe her grandfather was, I think he was also a 32nd degree Mason. And she had asked me the question. She said, Stewart as a last, so my last name was Stewart. Ask Gary if I could be an adept.
Well, you would know whether you're an adept. Somewhere along with the Stewart bloodline, your parents, grandparents, or however far they left that whole system. You may be, reached out at some point in time, but you would know whether or not you were initiated or not. There's no
Middle ground,
misunderstanding
yeah.
that, because at that adept level, you're taught
you'd have
that
to know. Yep.
Satan is the great architect of the universe and the God that you worship, and that the God of the Bible is evil, and that Christians are evil, and all sorts of things like that. So you would know. Stewarts are the cupbearers, and it's a title that goes back to Sargon in the Beast Empires and early post-Diluvian giants, and king in waiting until he actually becomes the king. So like the Prince of Wales type of thing. In that the Stewarts, and again, likely from maybe distant bloodlines, but that bloodline, as it became the Stuart dynasty through intermarriage with the Bruces, because Bruce didn't have a son, had a daughter that married into the Stuart family. But that whole Stuart dynasty was considered the most ennobled bloodline since the Merovingians.
Wow.
So it is considered, and there are still royal Stuarts that are still in the background and are also considered, candidates for the Dragon Messiah that they want to bring about.
Holy cow! Wow, the threads, they all pull so deeply. Well, here's a little rapid fire here for you. Carol EW asks, do the royals believe they have fallen blood in them?
Yes. It's what makes them superior. That whole supremacy movement is their ideology, both in their DNA and in what they would say their brain power and their divine right of inheritance. They consider humans mundane. So any politics that is waging one side against another side, that's their supremacy ideology.
Wow. Another question from Purple Pink. So when most are praising how intricate the founding documents, etc., for USA is, it's really not for the mass country cursed benefit, but for them?
Yeah, we've benefited, or I'm not in the US, but I mean, the Constitution is the basis that most constitutions around the world are, based on. So by inference, people have benefited from having rights and constitutions, but it was a long-term plan to be utilized because they created the United States to be the launching pad for world government and set the U.S. up on a model that would represent that, where you have all of these states.
Why do you think it's me?
Working independently, but with one strong, powerful central government. So I don't know whether you can hear me or not. I've got a thunderstorm that's rolling.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Might
Yep.
be,
Yeah, we're coming to the end of it.
Losing each other here.
Yeah, I have one final quick question here, and then we're going to go ahead and can it for the evening. Informer asks, I have a question. Did our Masonic forefathers of America try to break free from the other lodges? Can you still hear me there? I might be losing you. Oh, looks like I might be losing Gary, folks. Am I coming through?
Nah, Gary's gone.
Ah, I might have lost him. Well, I'll go ahead right here.
Okay, guys, I'm out too. God bless.